They say freezing to death is like falling asleep, but out here in the Siberian taiga, the cold has teeth. When 7, 4-year-old Leora opened her door to a howling blizzard. She expected death. Instead, she found 3 fading heartbeats buried in the snow. What happened next defied nature, terrified her neighbors, and proved that even the wildest beasts never forget a kindness. The thermometer nailed to the log exterior of Leora's cabin read -58 degrees Celsius. In the Oymyakon Valley of Yakutia, the locals call this the Whispering Stars, because when you exhale, the moisture in your breath freezes instantly with a sound like dry rice falling on paper. Leora Miller, a widow of 15 years, knew the sound well. She was not a woman built for pity. Her hands were gnarled like the roots of the larch trees surrounding her home, and her skin was weathered by decades of biting wind. She lived 4 miles from the nearest settlement, a distance that might as well have been 1,000 when the winter darkness swallowed the world for 20 hours a day. Most of her neighbors in the village urged her to move into the seniors' complex in town, but Leora refused. This cabin, with its wood-burning stove and the smell of dried herbs and resin, was the only place where she could still feel the presence of her late husband, Carl. It was a Tuesday in late January when the storm broke. The wind didn't howl. It screamed, tearing at the roof shingles and piling snow in drifts high enough to bury a car. Leora was securing the shutters when she heard it. It wasn't the wind. It was a sharp, distinct snap, the sound of a heavy branch giving way, followed by a dull thud near the woodshed. Leora grabbed her flashlight and her heavy rifle. Predators were bold in the starving months. Wolves would take a dog right off a chain. A bear, woken early by hunger, would tear through a door. She cracked the heavy oak door open, the wind instantly sucking the heat from the room. The beam of her flashlight cut through the swirling white. There, by the stacked cordwood, lay a shape that shouldn't have been there. It was large, tawny, and tragically still. Leora pushed through the waist-deep drift. It was a Eurasian lynx, a magnificent female. She was frozen solid, her eyes rimmed with frost. Her body curled protectively around something pressed against the shed wall. The mother had likely sought shelter from the wind, but succumbed to the brutal temperature, or perhaps starvation. Leora knelt, her knees popping. She reached out to touch the beautiful, tufted ear of the mother, offering a silent prayer of respect. Then, she saw movement. Beneath the rigid flank of the mother, a patch of fur twitched. Leora dug frantically with her mittened hands. Buried in the snow, shielded only by their mother's cooling body, were 3 cubs. They were tiny, their eyes barely open, soaked in melting snow, and shivering so violently they looked like vibrating blurs. She didn't think. She didn't consider the lack of food in her pantry, or the danger of bringing wild predators into her home. She scooped them up 1, 2, 3 balls of wet fur and shoved them inside her heavy sheepskin coat, against her chest. Back inside, she kicked the door shut and collapsed by the iron stove. She pulled the cubs out. They were limp. Their breathing was shallow, jagged gasps. 2 were larger, males by the look of their paws, but the third, a female, was significantly smaller the runt. "Not on my watch," Leora whispered, her voice rusty from disuse. She went to work. She filled hot water bottles and wrapped them in flannel. Creating a nest in her laundry basket, she rubbed their tiny bodies with a rough towel to stimulate circulation, massaging their chests until her own arms ached. For the first hour, nothing happened. They lay like stones. Then, the largest male let out a sound, a high-pitched, rusty squeak. Leora rushed to the kitchen. She had no formula, but she had goat's milk and egg yolks. She mixed a warm slurry, filled an eyedropper she used for her own glaucoma medicine, cleaned thoroughly, and sat by the basket. Feeding them took all night. The males, whom she named Titan and Silas, took the dropper greedily after the first few tries. But the runt, little Freya, refused to swallow. Leora sat up until 4 a.m., holding Freya against her neck, humming an old lullaby she hadn't sung since her own children were babies. "You have to fight, little one," Leora murmured, stroking the cub's head with her thumb. "The winter doesn't give second chances." Just as the sun began its lazy, grey ascent over the horizon, Freya sneezed. They were alive. But Leora had no idea that saving them was the easy part. Keeping them, and surviving what they would become, was a different story entirely. By March, the kittens were the size of spaniels, and the cabin had become a war zone. Raising a domesticated cat is a hobby. Raising 3 wild lynx is a full-time combat operation. They didn't walk. They flowed over furniture like liquid mercury. Leora's curtains were the first casualty. Silas decided they were tree trunks and shredded the heavy velvet to ribbons in an afternoon. Her favorite armchair was next, but it wasn't the destruction that worried Leora. It was the food. 3 growing lynx required meat pounds of it every single day. Leora's pension was meager. She started dipping into her own winter stores, eating plain porridge so she could buy chicken and beef scraps from the butcher in the village. When she went into town, she kept her mouth shut. In Yakutia, people viewed wolves and lynx as competitors or pests, not pets. If the wrong person found out, the authorities would come. Or worse, poachers. But secrets are hard to keep in small communities. One afternoon, a snowmobile engine roared up her driveway. Leora's stomach tightened. She shooed the cubs into the back bedroom and threw a blanket over the scratch marks on the doorframe. It was Maxim. Maxim was a man Leora had disliked for 40 years. He was a trapper, a man with cold eyes and a wallet made of wolfskin. He claimed to be checking on her after the storms, but Leora knew he was sniffing around. He had likely seen the extra meat she was buying. "Leora," he nodded, stepping into the cabin without asking. He stomped the snow off his heavy boots. "Smells like a zoo in here." "I have a new dog," Leora lied, standing between him and the hallway. Maxim's eyes scanned the room. He saw the shredded curtains. He saw the gnawed leg of the table. He laughed, a dry, cracking sound. "That's a big dog, Leora. Must have claws like knives." Just then, a thud came from the bedroom. Titan, the largest male, had likely knocked something over. Maxim took a step toward the hallway. "Let me see him. I'm good with dogs." "No," Leora said, her voice hard. She reached for the iron poker by the stove. It was a subtle move, but Maxim saw it. "Get out, Maxim. I'm fine." Maxim stared at her for a long moment, his eyes narrowing. He smelled the musk in the air. He knew. "You're playing a dangerous game, old woman. Those things, they don't have loyalty. They have hunger. One day you'll trip, or you'll forget to feed them, and they'll open your throat." He turned to the door. "And if they get out, if they come near my reindeer herd, I won't hesitate. I'll skin them. The fur is worth more than this shack." He slammed the door. Leora hurried to the bedroom. The 3 cubs were huddled together on the bed, ears flattened. They had sensed the tension. Freya, the one who had nearly died, jumped down and rubbed her cheek against Leora's leg, purring a sound like a diesel engine idling. Leora realized then that she was running out of time. They were getting too big, too strong. Titan was already practicing ambush tactics, hiding on top of the cupboards and launching himself at his siblings. The twist came 2 weeks later. Leora woke up to a silence that was too heavy. Usually, the mornings were filled with the sound of the cubs chasing each other. She sat up. The cabin door was ajar, her heart hammered against her ribs. She had latched it. She was sure of it. Unless the latch had frozen and popped open in the wind, or unless someone had opened it from the outside. "Titan? Silas?" she called out. Silence. She ran outside in her nightgown and boots. The snow around the porch was trampled. There were lynx tracks large, padded prints leading into the dense forest. But over top of them, there were other tracks. Boot prints. Maxim. Leora didn't panic. A cold, steely rage settled over her. She went back inside, put on her thermal suit, her heavy coat, and strapped her snowshoes on. She grabbed her rifle and a flare gun. She wasn't just an old woman anymore. She was a mother whose children had been taken. She followed the tracks into the timberline. The trail was messy. It looked like the cubs had been lured, perhaps with bait, and then scattered. Leora marched for 2 miles, her breath burning her lungs. The terrain grew steep, leading toward a rocky ridge known as the Razor. Suddenly, a gunshot echoed through the valley. Leora screamed, "No!" and forced her legs to move faster, ignoring the burning pain in her hips. She crested the ridge and looked down into the ravine. What she saw stopped her cold. Maxim was there, standing near a cluster of rocks, his rifle raised. But he wasn't shooting at a fleeing animal. He was backed against a cliff face, shouting, swinging his rifle like a club. Surrounding him were not 3 lynx, but 5 wolves. The winter had been hard, and the pack was desperate. But where were the cubs? Leora raised her rifle to fire a warning shot, to scare the wolves away. But before she could pull the trigger, a blur of grey and gold dropped from the ledge above Maxim's head. It was Titan. He didn't attack Maxim. He landed on the alpha wolf's back with a screech that sounded like a demon tearing through reality. A second later, Silas and Freya burst from the brush. Leora watched, stunned. The cubs hadn't been lured away. They had sensed the predator pack moving near the cabin, moving toward her home, and had gone out to meet the threat. Maxim had just walked into the middle of a turf war, but these were sub-adult lynx against fully grown timber wolves. Titan was thrown off into the snow. The wolves turned, sensing easier prey than the man with the gun. Leora didn't hesitate. She aimed into the air and fired the flare gun. A blinding red phosphorus light shrieked into the ravine, sizzling in the snow right between the wolves and the cats. The sudden light and the hiss of the flare panicked the wolves. They scattered, yelping, vanishing into the trees. Leora slid down the slope, rifle leveled. Maxim was pale, clutching his arm where he'd fallen. Titan was limping, blood on his flank. "Don't shoot," Maxim gasped. Leora ignored him. She dropped to her knees beside Titan. The great cat hissed, eyes wild, still in kill mode. But when Leora whispered his name, he blinked. The wildness receded, replaced by recognition. He head-butted her hand. "You came for me," Maxim said, his voice trembling. "I came for them," Leora spat, gesturing to the lynx. "Get up, and if you ever come near my house again, I won't use a flare." Maxim nodded, scrambling away. He never bothered her again. But the incident proved Maxim right about one thing. They were wild animals. They had defended their territory, but the call of the wild was getting stronger. Titan's limp healed, but he spent hours staring out the window. Leora knew she had to let them go. The heartbreak was inevitable. When spring finally broke the back of winter, Leora opened the door and didn't call them back. They lingered on the porch for an hour. Freya was the last to leave. She looked back at Leora, her golden eyes unreadable, before vanishing into the greening tree line. Leora was alone again. The silence in the cabin was deafening. She thought that was the end of the story, a beautiful, painful memory of the winter she became a mother to the wild. She was wrong. The story wasn't over. The unbelievable part was yet to come. 5 years passed. Leora, now nearly 80, had grown frail. The winters were harder to endure, and her woodpile seemed harder to stack every year. Then came the night the heater died. 5 years is a lifetime in the wild. But for Leora, it was a slow fade. The cabin, once her sanctuary, had begun to feel like a coffin. Her hands shook too much to chop wood effectively, and her eyesight was failing, casting a permanent twilight over the valley. It was mid-January, the heart of the black ice season in Yakutia. The temperature plummeted to negative 62 degrees Celsius, a cold so profound it felt like planetary exile. The air didn't just freeze. It thickened. Birds froze mid-flight, falling like stones onto the roofs of Oymyakon. That night, the old cast-iron stove, the beating heart of Leora's home, betrayed her. She had gotten up to stoke the fire, a routine etched into her bones. But as she leveraged a heavy log into the belly of the stove, a wave of dizziness hit her. It was her blood pressure, erratic and unmanaged. She stumbled. Her hips struck the corner of the hearth with a sickening crunch. The log fell from her hands, rolling across the floor, and Leora collapsed. Pain, white-hot and blinding, tore through her leg. She tried to rise, but her body refused. She was pinned by her own frailty. From her vantage point on the floor, she watched with growing horror as the embers in the stove glowed bright red, then orange, then a dull, dying grey. The fire went out. Panic is the first stage of freezing. Leora dragged herself across the rough floorboards, inch by agonizing inch, trying to reach the pile of kindling. She made it 3 feet before blacking out from the agony. When she woke, the cabin was silent. The silence of the taiga is not peaceful. It is heavy. The temperature inside was dropping rapidly. She could see her breath in thick, milky clouds. The frost was already blooming on the inside of the windows, intricate patterns that looked like skeletal fingers reaching for her. She knew this feeling. She had lived in Yakutia all her life. She knew the stages. First, the shivering, violent, uncontrollable tremors as the body tries to generate heat. Then, the stiffness. Finally, the paradoxical undressing, where the brain, confused and dying, tricks you into thinking you are burning hot. Leora huddled under the thin rug she had managed to pull off the floor. The shivering began. Her teeth chattered so hard she thought they would crack. "Carl," she whispered into the dark, calling for her husband. "I'm coming." Hours passed. The cold was a physical weight, pressing the life out of her. Her fingers were numb, useless claws. She drifted in and out of consciousness. The terror faded, replaced by a strange, narcotic calm. She stopped shivering. That was the bad sign. The end was near. Then she heard it. A sound at the window. A scratch. A whine. Leora's heavy eyelids fluttered. "Wolves," she thought. "They've come to finish what the cold started." She couldn't fight. Her rifle was on the wall, 1,000,000 miles away. Kriak, the sound wasn't the window. It was the door. She had forgotten to latch it after bringing in the last load of wood. The heavy oak door pushed open, bringing with it a swirl of snow and air that registered as -60 degrees. Leora whimpered. The Reaper had walked in. She felt a weight settle on the floor beside her. Heavy, muscular. Then, a scent. Not the rot of a wolf, or the musty smell of a bear. It was sharp, piney, and strangely familiar. Something rough and wet rasped across her cheek. She forced her eyes open. In the pale moonlight reflecting off the snow outside, 2 golden orbs glowed above her. Huge, tufted ears twitched. It was a lynx. Massive, perhaps 80 pounds of muscle and fur. The beast didn't bite. It lowered its great head and sniffed her neck, its whiskers tickling her freezing skin. Then, it did something impossible. It lay down, it pressed its warm, thick fur against Leora's back. Then another shadow entered. And another. Leora thought she was hallucinating. This was the final dream. A mercy from her dying brain. She felt a weight across her legs, painful on her broken hip, yet radiantly warm. A deep, rumbling sound filled the room. Purring. It was so loud, it vibrated through the floorboards, through her ribs, and into her stopping heart. "Titan!" she breathed. The word barely a ghost of a sound. The cat near her face head-butted her chin, a gesture of affection she hadn't felt in 5 years. Leora Miller closed her eyes, surrounded by the apex predators of the taiga. She was sandwiched between them, buried in a pile of living fur. The cold tried to take her, but the heat of the pack fought back. They were a furnace of blood and bone, reclaiming their mother from the ice. She slept, anchored to the earth by the weight of the wild. The morning sun over Oymyakon is not warm. It is merely a flashlight in a freezer. Maxim, the man who had once threatened to skin the cubs, was now an old man himself. He drove the village snowplow, clearing the remote tracks. He hadn't seen smoke from Leora's chimney in 2 days. He told himself he didn't care. But the memory of that day on the ridge, the day the cats saved him, gnawed at him. He turned the plow down her long driveway. The cabin looked dead. The windows were opaque with ice. No smoke. "Stubborn old fool," Maxim grumbled, grabbing his medical kit and a crowbar. He feared what he would find. In this part of the world, finding a neighbor frozen in their bed was a grim reality. He pounded on the door. It swung open, unlatched. "Leora!" he shouted, stepping into the freezing gloom. The room was dim, lit only by the shaft of light from the door. Then he stopped, and his blood turned to ice water. On the floor, near the dead stove, was a writhing mass of tawny fur. It looked like a monster, a hydra of limbs and ears. Maxim raised his crowbar, terrified. The mass shifted. 3 distinct heads snapped up. 6 golden eyes locked onto him. They hissed in unison, a sound like steam escaping a high-pressure valve. Maxim froze. He recognized the scar on the nose of the largest one. Titan. The lynx weren't eating her. They were covering her. Titan stood up, placing himself between Maxim and the body on the floor. He didn't retreat. He growled, a low, guttural warning that vibrated in Maxim's chest. The other 2, Freya and Silas, remained flat, their bodies draped over the old woman like a living blanket. "I'm here to help," Maxim whispered, holding his hands up. "I'm helping her." He moved slowly. Titan watched him, muscles coiled, ready to spring. Maxim knelt 5 feet away. "Liora?" From beneath the pile of fur, a weak voice croaked. "Maxim? Don't hurt them." Maxim let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. "I won't. I need to get you to the hospital, Liora." "You're freezing." As Maxim moved closer, Titan snapped his jaws, inches from Maxim's hand. "Call him off, Liora!" Maxim yelled, panic rising. "Titan," Liora whispered. "It's okay. Friend." The massive cat hesitated. He looked at Liora, then at Maxim. Slowly, reluctantly, he stepped back. He didn't leave, though. He sat on his haunches, watching Maxim with the intensity of a sniper. Maxim worked fast. He checked her vitals. She was hypothermic, her skin waxy, her pulse thready. But she was alive. The heat from the animals had maintained her core temperature just above the fatal threshold. He radioed for the emergency helicopter from Yakutsk. When the chopper arrived an hour later, the noise of the rotors terrified the animals. They bolted for the open door, vanishing into the tree line like smoke. The paramedics were stunned. Dr. Sergeyev, the trauma specialist who treated Liora at the Republican hospital in Yakutsk, couldn't explain it. By all medical logic, she should have been dead within 4 hours, Sergeyev told the local news crew later. The temperature in that cabin was negative 40 degrees Celsius. She was on the floor for 12 hours. Her back and chest were warm to the touch when she arrived. It's medically impossible. Liora spent 3 weeks in the hospital. She lost 2 toes to frostbite and had a titanium rod put in her hip. The doctors told her she could never live alone in the cabin again. It was too dangerous. The day she was discharged, she asked Maxim to drive her back to the cabin one last time, to pack her things. She was moving to the assisted living facility in town. They arrived at the cabin in the late afternoon. The silence was absolute. The cabin felt empty, truly empty this time. Liora sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, while Maxim loaded boxes into his truck. "They won't come back," Maxim said gently. "The helicopter scared them. They're gone." Liora nodded, tears carving tracks through the wrinkles on her cheeks. She looked toward the tree line, the dark wall of pines where the taiga began. "Thank you," she whispered to the wind. "My beautiful children." She turned to leave, but then a shadow detached itself from the trees. It was Freya. The runt she had nursed with an eyedropper. Freya walked out into the clearing. She wasn't alone. Behind her, stumbling through the snow, were 2 balls of fluff kittens. Liora gasped. Freya stopped 10 yards away. She looked at Liora, then nudged the kittens forward. It was an introduction. "See? We survive. Because of you." Titan and Silas emerged a moment later, flanking their sister. They stood there for a long minute, a silent vigil between 2 species that are supposed to be enemies. They didn't approach. They didn't need to. Liora smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that made her look 20 years younger. Freya chuffed, turned, and led her family back into the deep woods. Liora Miller moved to town that day. She lived another 6 years, passing away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 86. But her cabin still stands. Hunters in the Oymyakon Valley tell a story, though most don't believe it. They say if you get lost near Liora's old cabin during a blizzard, you shouldn't be afraid of the beasts. They say a pack of giant lynx patrols that ridge not to hunt men, but to watch over the lost. They say the cats have a strange patch of white fur on their chests, shaped vaguely like a human hand. They are the guardians of the valley, the legacy of the woman who warmed the winter and was warmed in return. We often think of nature as cruel, a place where only the strong survive. But Liora's story teaches us something different. That even in the coldest corners of the earth, compassion is a currency that never loses its value. She saved them from the ice, and when the time came, they returned the favor. It's a reminder that no act of kindness, no matter how small, is ever wasted. If this story melted your heart, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. Have you ever had a connection with a wild animal? Tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one, And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story from the wild. Stay warm, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.